Tatami Galaxy is pretty fantastic. It sits firmly in the upper rankings of anime I've completed, and I'm sure your friendly and only slightly elitist buddies have it proudly displayed in their 3x3s. It's a powerful and exceedingly clever story, both in premise and execution, thematically more relevant now than ever, and with its strong characterization and unique visual style, it was destined to be loved by its fair few followers. One aspect, however, that sits sorely overlooked is the delightful OST that accompanies this swooping tale. I'll admit, I am biased to an extent. A classically trained instrumentalist, I fall easily for a good orchestral score. And what's more, Tatami Galaxy even utilizes a delightful violin solo, not a far step from my primary instrument. However, more so than mere instrumentation, I find its thematic representation to be perfectly apt for the character of the show. Michiru Oshima certainly knows her way around a score. She's been in the game for a while, and what's more, with soundtracks like Fullmetal Alchemist 2003, Little Witch Academia, and Sora no Woto under her belt, her skill at crafting a suitable soundtrack is undeniable. Keeping in mind that not everyone is interested in a 70-minute song-by-song breakdown, though I'm certainly not averse to such a project in the future, let's take a look at the excellent way the soundtrack establishes characters, specifically in reference to the three characters upon which the story hinges: Watashi, Ozu, and Akashi. Let's start out with Ozu's theme. Though Watashi's comes prior in the soundtrack listing, and it occurs first, my larger point in regards to the musical representation of these three characters hinges on that being the finale, so we'll be saving that for last. This piece seems to be a habanera, a Spanish and Spanish-American style of music and dance popular in the 18th century. You've probably heard the extremely famous habanera from Bizet's Carmen, though the piece actually originated with Sebastian Yedier. Bizet just mistakenly thought the piece was a folk song. We can draw a lot of direct comparisons between the two. In fact, the plucked ostinato line in the cello and bass in this piece is strikingly similar to the cello opening found in Carmen's habanera, just at a slower pace. In fact, if we write this out, you will see it is the exact same, just a whole step lower. Though good artists borrow and great artists steal, Oshima is far from a plagiarist, and I wonder if it might even be an intentional reference. The dangerous yet seductive figure of Carmen is certainly an interesting figure to tie to the eerie yet inescapable Ozu. Theory crafting aside, upon this baseline we have the addition of castanets, adding to that Spanish flavor, an ebbing orchestra, and above it all solo clarinet. The way the solo dwells on the first note, then moving an octave up and oscillating with the note directly below it, before a small jump upwards and a chromatic descending line, well establishes the sneaky character of Ozu. Stepwise motion, particularly chromatic stepwise motion, is often used to convey movement. You need look no farther than a classic Tom and Jerry cartoon. And especially with the slower pace and dance-like character of the piece, you can clearly picture Ozu crawling in the shadows, a devilish smile on his face as he plots the next escapade. The additional touches of strings serve only to embellish this character and give some variation to the ear. There's also a brief interlude with a duet between accordion and the cello section, followed by a closing with the return of the clarinet solo. This piece works really well, not just because it is well written, though it is, but also because it works off of a lot of musical language that most people will be familiar with, to establish some very clear characteristics of Ozu, all of these which are also reinforced by the visuals and narrative. It's catchy, clever, and to the point. The second of the themes is Akashi's theme. This piece also starts with pizzicato as the backdrop, here establishing a very simple two-note idea in the cello and double bass, which is followed by a response from the violins and violas taking the shape of a two-bar pattern. This is repeated as the flute solo makes its entrance, playing staccato on the notes that occur during the strong beats of the measure, and that are often the higher peaks in the musical line. The way it comes into notes from below after each peak smooths out the jumps for a gentler character, with a sextuplet leading into the downbeat of the next phrase, adding some intrigue, as for the most part the piece is fairly simple rhythmically. After this is repeated, we get a more strongly staccato figure that only at the very end of the line resolves into legato. The section is a bit more playful, and after being repeated once more with a slight variation, transitions into what is at first the exact same phrase, just slurred and one octave down. but which uses the change in articulation to move into a more directionless section, as it plays around with repeating several different figures, before finding somewhat of a resolution, then drifting off with a pointed staccato figure that leads us right back home to the initial theme as we come into a full resolution. Akashi is a pretty simple character, and that's not to knock her in any way whatsoever. I absolutely adore her characterization, but to put it simply, through the lens of experience Tatami Galaxy presents, we are unable to get to know her in any particularly deep way. We simply can't spend a lot of time dwelling on Akashi specifically. Rather, what's important is the role she plays towards Watashi's development. This piece does a pretty good job of embodying her relationship towards her friends and particularly towards Watashi. Gentle but not frail, showing her eloquence and intelligence, but also embodying her more playful characteristics. I don't know if I would say it's quite as absolutely perfect a match as Ozu's theme. Then again, it's hard to hit it out of the park that well every time, but it definitely suits Akashi and the role she plays within the story well. Alright, now it's time for the theme for our unnamed protagonist, Watashi's theme. Centered around a violin solo with piano and orchestral accompaniment, it embodies a more wistful tone, utilizing chromaticism and outlining an E minor triad. The accompaniment moves beneath the solo, ebbing out at the end of the measure as the solo takes over the melodic movement, then highlighting the end of the phrase with a straightforward descending line followed by an ascension towards a cadence. After a repeat of this sequence, there is a starry descending line as the violin jumps to the higher side of its upper register, then falling all the way down to its lower string, and building once more from there. The way this piece utilizes the range and textures available to the violin is extremely effective at creating a sensation of a cohesive but extremely varied experience, all within a rather short time frame. Often the violin enters with a scratchy, harsher sound that then gives way to a more lyrical, melodious character. A subtle touch that adds so much to the sensation of a fleshed out journey. If you'd allow me, I'd like to posit my theory. Most of the music in the show is directly analogous to the initial impressions one would have of the objects, people, or ideas it represents, well suited for the largely caricatured nature of a lot of the show. However, this piece is not. One would think that for our fast-talking cynic at the forefront of the show, we would have a far more upbeat, at the least perhaps comical piece, yet that is not the case. The piece does not even exhibit an exaggerated emotionality to imbue a sense of wry comedy to Watashi's often self-inflicted plights. Rather, the piece to represent the character that is the core behind Tatami Galaxy as a series, Watashi quite excellently chooses to encapsulate the overall nature of him as a whole, rather than any specific characteristics. It opts to portray the nuanced flavor behind Watashi's arc, how he stands at an impasse, seemingly 2 years wasted, everything beyond his control, tied to Ozu with the black thread of fate. Yet the situation is not as dire as our protagonist would have you believe. The mixed up colors of campus life are what it's all about, the worthfulness of every experience. And with its oh-so nostalgic tone, that's what I feel expressed through this piece. Of course, I could be projecting far beyond Oshima's intent, yet I admire the soundtrack immensely simply for giving me the opportunity to find that degree of meaning and subtlety in such a short and lovely piece. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more music analysis, well, definitely stick around and leave any suggestions in the comments below. I do all sorts of videos, but I love to take the time to talk about music. I would also strongly recommend checking out That Music Nerd. He does extremely in-depth music analysis for anime and is super underrated, so please give him a watch. He most recently put out a great video on Gurren Lagann's OST, and he also covered other great soundtracks like Land of the Lustrous and Made in Abyss. Check out my second channel, Kor's Contemplations, for unscripted content. I do random thought pieces alongside 2 series. One a podcast where I'm trying every anime from 2010 and talking about what I finished and what I didn't, and the other a vlog series where I give my first impressions on seasonal shows as I decide what I'll be dropping right off the bat and what I'll be holding on to for a little longer. I also run a podcast called Natsukashi where I discuss old anime with other AniTubers. And finally, you can find me on Twitter at Kor Reviews to keep up with my random thoughts and the never-ending stream of content. I'll see y'all in the next one.